The message came at 11:42 p.m., a short vibration on a phone that rarely received anything except business orders and death threats. But this one was different. It was from an unknown number, a child's number. "They're hurting my mommy. Please help." The syndicate leader, Dominic Cross, stared at the screen. He frowned at first, thinking it was a mistake, a scam, or a stupid wrong number. Then, another text arrived, shorter and shakier. "I'm hiding." He said he'll kill her. Dominic's breath stilled. He had seen fear. He had caused fear. But he had never seen this. A child begging a stranger because she had no one else left. He typed only 3 words. "I'm on my way. No hositashchen." No questions. No second thoughts. His men froze as he stood up, grabbed his coat, and walked out the door. "Boss, where are you going?" his second-in-command, Silas, asked. Dominic didn't answer. He didn't need to. Something in that child's words, that trembling desperation, had hit a part of him he thought had died decades ago. As his car tore through the rainy streets of Philadelphia, another message appeared. "I hear footsteps. Please hurry." Dominic clenched the steering wheel, his pulse hammering. Streetlights blurred past. By the time he reached the address, he already knew. Tonight, he wasn't arriving as a syndicate boss. He was arriving as the only hope that little girl had left. And what he found inside that house changed everything. Stay with me until the end, because what Dominic discovered in that living room will make your heart stop and start again. Before we begin, don't forget to like this video, hit subscribe, and comment where you're watching from. Now, let's get started. To the underworld of Philadelphia, Dominic Cross was a ghost story told to keep insubordinate men in line. He was a man who ruled through calculated silence and absolute certainty. "Will you be my guardian forever?" she asked, her voice soft, full of an unshakable, terrifying faith. "I promise," Julian had told her, wrapping his thin arm around her small shoulders. "I'll always protect you, no matter what happens." It was a sacred vow, a promise stamped into the core of his identity. But the streets of Philadelphia do not honor the vows of children. The tragedy occurred on a sweltering evening in late August. The apartment was an oven, and Maya had asked for a cup of shaved ice from the cart at the end of the block. Julian had hesitated, looking down at the 2 nickels in his palm, then looked at his sister's sweaty face and nodded. He told her to lock the heavy wooden door behind him and to stay away from the windows. He was gone for less than 10 minutes. As he walked back up the concrete steps of the tenement, holding the melting ice in a paper cup, a sudden, deafening roar tore through the narrow street. It was the frantic, uneven rhythm of automatic gunfire, the calling card of a local street gang executing a retaliation hit on a rival corner. People screamed, scattering like leaves in a sudden gale. Julian didn't look for cover. He dropped the cup and sprinted up the stairs, his chest burning, a terrible, icy dread freezing his blood. When he burst through the door of their 3rd-floor apartment, the air was thick with smoke and the bitter stench of burnt gunpowder. A stray bullet, fired blindly from an SUV on the street below, had pierced the thin exterior wall of the building. It had traveled through the cheap plaster, through the back of the sofa, and found its mark. Maya lay on her side on the worn green carpet. Her colored pencils were scattered around her like broken teeth. The drawing she had been working on, a picture of a knight standing outside a golden castle, was turning dark, soaked by the blood expanding from her chest. "Maya! Maya, please!" Julian had screamed, throwing himself onto the floor, his hands desperately pressing against her small shirt, trying to hold the life inside her. But the blood leaked through his fingers, warm and unstoppable. She opened her eyes one last time. The brilliant, imaginative light that usually filled them was gone, replaced by a terrible, dull emptiness. She didn't cry. She didn't even seem to feel the pain. She just looked at him, her small hand reaching up to touch his collarbone, leaving a dark smear against his skin. "Julian," she whispered, her voice fading into the sound of sirens approaching in the distance. You came back. I'm here, Maya. Don't go to sleep. Look at me," he begged, the tears blinding him, his voice cracking into a high, jagged sob. "Promise me," she gasped, her tiny frame shuddering as her lungs filled. "Promise me you'll save them, the other kids. When they're hiding, don't let the dark win." Then her hand fell away. Her chest became completely still. When the paramedics finally arrived 20 minutes later, delayed by the gang activity on the block, they found a boy who had turned to stone. He wouldn't let them touch her body. He sat there in the blood, his eyes wide and vacant, staring at the wall. The boy named Julian died on that floor. What walked out of that apartment days later was something different, something cold, unyielding, and completely detached from human empathy. In the decades that followed, his mother, Rose, succumbed to the grief, her mind fracturing until she had to be placed in a quiet sanitarium upstate. Left entirely alone in the world, Julian changed his name to Dominic Cross. He realized that the law was a luxury meant for people who lived in houses with manicured lawns. For people like him, the only protection was power. He entered the criminal underworld not for the money, but for the control. He wanted to be the entity that decided who lived and who died. He wanted to build walls so thick that nothing could ever hurt him again. He rose through the ranks with terrifying speed. He never hesitated, never showed mercy, and never allowed a personal connection to compromise a business interest. He became the absolute ruler of the Philadelphia syndicate. He convinced himself that the promise he had made to Maya was a foolish dream of a 13-year-old child, a dream that had died along with her. Until tonight, until those glowing white letters appeared on his burner phone, sent from an 8-year-old girl named Bella Sterling. Dominic looked down at the device resting on the passenger seat. Dominic slammed on the brakes. The heavy sedan skidded on the wet asphalt, coming to a halt directly behind the pickup truck. The headlights were turned off instantly, plunging the vehicle into the shadows of the streetlights. Dominic looked through the rain-streaked side window. The front windows of 814 were dark, but through the glass pane of the front door, he could see a faint, flickering light from the hallway inside. And then he heard it. Even over the sound of the pouring rain and the idling engine, the muffled sound of a heavy blow echoed through the night, followed by a woman's sharp, truncated scream. Dominic didn't wait. He didn't formulate a plan. He didn't coordinate with Silas. And he didn't check his surroundings. He threw his door open, stepping out into the freezing deluge, his dark coat billowing around him like the wings of a predatory bird. His hand went beneath his jacket, his fingers wrapping around the textured grip of his silenced automatic pistol. 25 years of cold, repressed violence settled into his muscles, turning his panic into a sharp, lethal focus. He wasn't a Mafia Don tonight. He was the knight his sister had drawn on that piece of paper before she died. He walked up the concrete steps, his shadow stretching long and terrifying across the front door. He could hear a man's voice inside, rough, slurred, and dripping with an ugly, absolute malice. "You think you can hide from me in your own house, Iris? You think that little brat of yours can protect you?" Dominic reached out, his gloved hand gripping the brass doorknob. It was locked. He took a single step back, raised his heavy boot, and kicked the lock out of the frame with a sound like a gunshot. The door burst inward, the wooden frame splintering into jagged shards that scattered across the linoleum entryway. Dominic stepped over the threshold before the debris had even settled, his weapon raised, his eyes scanning the narrow hallway with a terrifying, mechanical efficiency. The interior of the row house was suffocatingly small. It smelled of cheap tobacco, stale beer, and the metallic, unmistakable odor of fresh blood. The walls were covered in faded wallpaper that was peeling at the corners, and an old floor lamp had been knocked over in the hallway, its bulb flickering erratically on the floor. From a living room to his right, a man's voice barked out, startled, angry, and slurred by alcohol. "Who the hell is that? Damien, is that you? I told you guys I'd have the money by Monday." Dominic didn't say a word. He moved down the hallway with the silent, fluid grace of an apex predator. He turned into the archway of the living room, his weapon extended, his finger resting lightly against the trigger. The scene inside was worse than anything his burner phone had described. The room had been completely dismantled. A small wooden dining table had been flipped onto its side, its legs broken. Family photographs lay scattered across the carpet, their glass covers crushed into a glittering dust. In the corner of the room, slumped against the base of an old television set, was Iris Sterling. Her face was unrecognizable. Her left eye was swollen shut, her lips split open and bleeding onto the collar of her gray sweatshirt. She was clutching her ribs, her breath coming in short, agonizing gasps that whistled through her teeth. She was trying to pull herself upright, her fingers clawing at the cheap fabric of the sofa, but her strength was entirely spent. Standing over her was Damian Vance. He was a thick-necked, heavy-set man in his early 40s, wearing a grease-stained tank top and heavy work boots. His face was flushed red with rage and alcohol, his knuckles scraped and bloody. In his hand, he held a heavy glass whiskey bottle, its neck broken into a jagged weapon. "Who are you, mister?" Damian growled, turning his bulk toward Dominic. He didn't look at the weapon in Dominic's hand. His brain was too clouded by liquor and arrogance to recognize the danger standing in front of him. "This is private property. Get the hell out of my house before I cut you open." Dominic looked at him. He didn't see a man. He saw disease. He saw the same cowardly, violent rot that had allowed a stray bullet to take his sister's life 25 years ago. It was the absolute lack of accountability, the belief that the strong had the right to destroy the weak simply because no one was there to stop them. "Where's the girl?" Dominic asked. His voice wasn't loud, but it possessed a terrifying, freezing stillness that seemed to lower the temperature in the room by 10 degrees. Damian laughed, an ugly, wet sound that sprayed saliva into the air. "What girl? You mean Bella? That little parasite? She's where she belongs, hiding like a dog. Now, I told you to get out." Damian took a single step forward, raising the broken bottle. Dominic didn't hesitate. He moved with a speed that defied his large frame. He closed the distance between them in a fraction of a second, his left hand coming out to grip Damian's wrist, twisting it outward until the bones cracked with a sound like dry kindling. The broken bottle fell from Damian's useless fingers, shattering on the carpet. Before Damian could scream, Dominic brought the heavy steel barrel of his automatic pistol down across the bridge of the man's nose. The impact was brutal. Damian's nose flattened instantly, blood spraying across his own face as he stumbled backward, crashing over the overturned dining table and landing heavily on his back. He groaned, his hands moving to his face as he rolled on the floor, his arrogance completely evaporating, replaced by the sudden, panicked terror of a bully who had finally met a real monster. "Silas," Dominic called out, never removing his eyes from the groaning man on the floor. Silas appeared in the doorway, his weapon drawn, his face grim as he took in the scene. "I'm here, boss." "Watch him," Dominic said. "If he attempts to stand, shoot him in the knee." "Understood," Silas said, stepping into the room, his pistol trained directly on Damian's chest. Dominic knelt down beside Iris. He didn't touch her. He knew that to a traumatized woman, any sudden movement from a large man was a threat. He kept his hands visible, his voice dropping into that same quiet, steady tone he had used with his mother when her mind began to wander in the hospital. "Iris," he said softly, "my name is Dominic. Your daughter sent me a message. You are safe now. The doctor is on her way to take care of you." Iris looked up at him through her single open eye, her face twisted in pain and fear. "Bella, is she safe?" "I'm going to get her right now," Dominic promised. "She's upstairs. Stay still. Do not try to move your ribs." He rose to his feet, his long black coat brushing against the blood-stained carpet. He walked out of the living room and toward the narrow wooden staircase that led to the second floor. Every step he took up those stairs felt like a descent into his own past. He could hear his own heartbeat in his ears, not the fast, panicked rhythm of fear, but the deep, steady thud of a man who had finally found his purpose after 25 years in the dark. The second floor was completely dark, save for the pale light of a street lamp filtering through a window at the end of the hall. The air was colder up here, the sound of the rain against the roof loud and rhythmic. There were 3 doors along the hallway, 2 bedrooms and a small bathroom. Dominic walked down the corridor, his footsteps completely silent on the worn runner rug. He stopped outside the door to the smallest bedroom. The door was made of cheap plywood, and near the bottom, there was a small indentation where a heavy boot had struck it. Dominic stood there for a moment, his hand resting on the brass knob. He took a deep breath, consciously smoothing the tension from his face, forcing his expression into something approaching gentleness. He reached down and tucked his pistol into his holster, hiding it beneath his jacket. He knocked softly on the wood, 3 light taps. "Bella," he called out, his voice quiet, carrying a warmth that his captains would have found unrecognizable. "It's Dominic, the man from the phone. I'm here." There was a long, agonizing silence. Dominic felt a sudden, terrifying panic grip his chest. The irrational fear that he was too late, that the past had repeated itself despite his speed. Then he heard a faint click. The closet door inside the room creaked open, followed by the sound of small, hesitant footsteps on the floorboards. The bedroom door opened an inch, and a single, brilliant blue eye peered out through the crack. Bella Sterling was 8 years old. She had pale skin, a small, bird-like frame, and fine blonde hair that was tangled around her ears. She was wearing a pair of faded pajamas with small yellow stars on them, and she was clutching an old, battery-operated phone with a dead screen in her tiny hands. When she saw Dominic, she didn't shrink back. She looked at his face, at his dark coat, and then she looked down at his shoes, which were wet from the rain. She looked back up into his eyes, and a small, trembling breath escaped her lips. You really came," she whispered. "I told you I was on my way," Dominic said, dropping to his knees so he was looking up at her, reducing his imposing height. "I don't break my word, Bella." The little girl pulled the door open the rest of the way. She didn't look at the chaos downstairs. She didn't ask about Damien. She simply stepped forward, her small arms reaching out, and wrapped them tightly around Dominic's neck. She buried her face in the rough wool of his overcoat, her tiny shoulders shaking as she finally allowed herself to cry. Dominic stiffened at first, his body unaccustomed to the pure, unvarnished weight of a child's trust. But then something deep inside his chest gave way. The final, frozen wall around his heart dissolved completely. He reached up, his large, scarred hands gently wrapping around her small back, holding her against him with a fierce, protective tenderness. "It's over, Bella," he whispered into her hair, his eyes closing as a single, hot tear escaped his lids, tracking down his cheek. "You're safe. Your mommy is safe. Nobody is ever going to scare you in the dark again." He held her for a long time, letting her exhaust her tears into the fabric of his coat. He felt the ghost of Maya resting its hand on his shoulder, the old debt finally paid, the old promise finally fulfilled. He had spent 25 years building an empire of blood and fear, but in this small, dark bedroom, he realized that true power wasn't the ability to destroy, it was the strength to shield the innocent from the storm. Below, the sound of an approaching vehicle cut through the rain. It was the quiet, refined engine of Dr. Alana Vance's private ambulance, accompanied by 2 of Dominic's most trusted security personnel. Dominic lifted Bella into his arms. She felt as light as a bundle of dry twigs, her small fingers clutching the lapel of his coat as if he were the only solid object in a world that had fallen apart. He carried her down the stairs, his movements careful, ensuring her face was turned away from the living room as they descended. In the entryway, Dr. Alana Vance was already entering, followed by 2 paramedics carrying a collapsible stretcher. Alana took one look at Dominic, noted the child in his arms and the expression in his eyes, and nodded without asking a single question. She had served the Cross family for 12 years, and she knew that silence was the most valuable commodity they traded in. "The mother is in the living room," Dominic told her, his voice returning to its steady, authoritative tone. "Severe abdominal trauma, possible concussion. Take her to the private clinic in Cherry Hill. No police reports, no public records. I've got her, Dominic," Alana said, moving quickly toward the living room with her team. Silas stepped out into the hallway, wiping his hands with a handkerchief. Damien Vance was no longer on the floor. 2 of Dominic's security men were dragging his semi-conscious bulk out through the back door toward a waiting van. He would not be going to a hospital, and he would not be going to jail. He was entering a world where men like him were forced to pay their debts in full, far away from the sight of the law. "What do you want us to do with the house, boss?" Silas asked quietly. Dominic looked around the narrow, depressing hallway. "Lock it up. Secure their personal belongings. They won't be coming back here." He carried Bella out into the rain, shielding her with the wide brim of his hat as he walked toward his sedan. He opened the rear door, placing her gently onto the leather seat before stepping in beside her. The interior of the car was warm, the smell of premium leather and heating oil creating a sudden, secure barrier against the hostile world outside. Alana's team carried Iris out on the stretcher, her face covered by an oxygen mask, but her eyes were open, tracking the black sedan until she saw her daughter's face through the glass. She closed her eyes, her shoulders relaxing as the ambulance doors slammed shut. Dominic pulled out his burner phone, the device that had started it all. He looked at the screen, which was now filled with notifications from his syndicate captains asking about the missed meeting at the harbor. He didn't care. He selected the contact number for his real estate manager and typed a brief message. The property in Chestnut Hill. The colonial with the enclosed garden. Have it cleaned, furnished, and ready for occupancy by noon tomorrow. Put under the Sterling name. He turned his phone off, sliding it into his pocket. He looked down at Bella, who had curled up against his side, her small hand resting on his knee, her blue eyes heavy with a profound, bone-deep exhaustion. "Uncle Dominic?" she whispered, her voice fading into sleep. "I'm right here, Bella," he said, his hand gently covering hers. "Are you going to stay with us?" Dominic looked out the window at the rain-washed streets of Philadelphia. The city looked different tonight. The shadows didn't seem quite as deep, and the neon signs didn't seem quite as cold. He had spent his entire life running from the boy he used to be, but tonight he had finally found his way home. "Yes, Bella," he said, his voice absolute. "I'm going to stay." 6 months later, the spring sun was shining brightly over the rolling green lawns of Chestnut Hill. The old stone colonial house sat at the end of a long, private driveway lined with blooming dogwood trees. The air smelled of wet earth and fresh grass, a world away from the industrial exhaust and damp concrete of the old naval yard. Iris Sterling sat on the wooden porch swing, a mug of tea in her hands, watching through the pristine glass windows as her daughter played in the yard. Iris's face had healed completely. The bruises were gone, replaced by a healthy, vibrant color and a quiet serenity that had seemed impossible half a year ago. Her hands no longer shook when the phone rang, and she no longer jumped at the sound of heavy footsteps in the hall. In the garden below, Bella was running through the flower beds, her wild blonde hair catching the sunlight as she chased a golden retriever puppy. Her laughter was loud, clear, and completely free of the terror that had once confined her to a dark closet. A long, black sedan pulled up the driveway, its tires crunching softly on the gravel. The door opened, and Dominic Cross stepped out. He wasn't wearing his heavy charcoal overcoat today. He was in a simple gray suit, his dark hair catching the light, his sharp features relaxed into an expression of genuine peace. "Uncle Dominic," Bella screamed, dropping her toys and sprinting across the lawn, her small legs moving as fast as they could. Dominic knelt down, his arms opening wide as she launched herself into him, catching her easily and swinging her around in a circle until she shrieked with delight. He set her down, reaching into his pocket to pull out a small wooden box containing a beautifully carved set of chess pieces. "Are you ready for your lesson today?" he asked, his dark eyes crinkling at the corners. "I'm going to beat you today, Uncle Dominic," she declared proudly, taking his hand and pulling him toward the porch. Dominic smiled, a warm, full sound that filled the yard. He had built an empire through fear, but his true legacy was standing right beside him, holding his hand with an unshakable, beautiful trust. The Cross Syndicate still ruled Philadelphia, but its nature had fundamentally transformed. The violence was gone from the daily operations, replaced by a quiet, absolute protection that ensured the vulnerable neighborhoods of the city were no longer hunting grounds for monsters. The underworld had learned a hard lesson. Dominic Cross was no longer just a businessman. He was a guardian. The text message from Bella had been sent to a wrong number. But in a universe full of chaos and broken promises, that single mistake had been the precision strike that shattered a heart of ice and saved 3 lives from the dark. It proved that sometimes salvation doesn't come from the sky. It comes from the dark, wearing an expensive suit and carrying the weight of a promise made to a dying sister 25 years ago. Thanks for watching, and remember to subscribe for more incredible true stories that prove even the most broken hearts can heal when given the chance to protect something precious.